Hello? Oh god! There's two of them. What? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, alright. Looks good to me. Welcome back! How about that intro, huh? I think I'm finally getting the hang of this whole newfangled YouTube thing. I got a lot of awesome feedback. Again, I don't think I would keep pumping these videos out if it weren't for all the really helpful comments I got. I'm gonna keep opening these videos with how thankful and happy I am that people like this stuff because it amazes me every time I think about it. That's not what you're here for though. Let's talk about what's going on in the speed build. I I did end up doing a lot of building and foliage and terrain work off camera again, simply because I got a lot more crashes while trying to record. I just think Planet Zoo and OBS don't really mix too well, and I didn't really want to deal with that. I'm sure it'll get better after more updates start rolling out for Planet Zoo, but for now you'll just have to deal with it. You'll see Little Eden has mountains now, real mountains. They took me forever, and they're pretty bare bones at the moment, but once I go in and fill them in with foliage and put texture on them, I think it'll look really good as a backdrop. So far, I think it already looks pretty good. I will go over what I did in real time at the end, so you'll not be missing much. It'll just happen in a different format, I guess. That being said, I really wanted to focus on this being a zoo, not really a national park, which is kind of what it was looking like so far. So what I did off camera was I went back in and put in more education boards and viewing platforms, that kind of thing. I noticed I had this one big, long path that led up past the bears and never really stopped to get a good look at them or gave many good vantage points. So I wanted to put in more places for people to sit and relax and just like look at the animals and the view around them. I also went back and fixed up that one viewing building by the flamingos to fit the new architectural style by the entrance. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. We'll go over that in real time. Kind of keeping on the same level of putting in viewing stuff. And I added in a animal welfare center off camera. I built. It's much more of like a semi-modern, the kind of thing that I mentioned in the last episode. Again, we'll take a look at all that stuff after the time lapse. I know what you're all really here for, though. It's not for me to ramble on about video games. Last episode, I talked about rocks for a long time. I'm probably going to be focusing more on meadows and the animal that I'm putting in, which is what I'll get into later. Meadows, for context, there are over 3,000 meadows in Yosemite National Park, and yet they only take up 3%, I believe, of the entire park. It definitely may seem like a small area, 3%, but they play a huge part in the ecological stability. They hold a great deal of the park's biodiversity within them. There are plants that grow only in the meadows within the Yosemite Valley, nowhere else in the world. Meadows are where all the water from the melting ice up in the mountains converges at and provides prime soil for some of Yosemite's most iconic and important plants, like wildflowers. The meadows are super important for the wildlife as well, as they offer food and water It's where you're most likely to spot bears and deer and birds, any animal really, if you're going up for a visit. Meadows are also culturally important for the people that live within or visit the valley. The Awanichi people, a culture native to Yosemite Valley, would actually burn these meadows for hunting, agriculture, materials, and believe it or not, this burning was actually good for the meadows. When European settlers stopped the fires in 1880, the meadows began disappearing. They became overrun by trees that could now sprout in the ground without disruption, which in turn disrupted many ecosystems. I'm pretty much quoting the Yosemite Park's nature notes when I'm talking about this because that's where I learned most of this stuff from, including the fact that the past 150 years, I believe the park has lost 2/3 of its meadow extent because, well, European settlers. They dried out the meadows in Yosemite to allow for livestock grazing and later on for parking lots. The meadows are coming back, though. The team at Yosemite, the Yosemite Conservancy, is really doing an amazing job to restore these vital parts of the ecosystem. They're taking out unnecessary parking lots, filling ditches, restoring moisture in areas that have been dried out, and the meadows come back quickly. They're bringing back the water, the native plants, and in turn it brings back the butterflies, the dragonflies, and then the bears and deer, and so on and so forth. It's really incredible to see the reconstruction of a habitat in action. The reason I wanted to go over this, though, is because I'm trying to reconstruct, I guess, a typical Yosemite meadow here in Little Eden for our American bison habitat. As you can see, I'm including some snow up here as well, because we're reaching the top of our mountain, as well to emulate the bison's natural habitat. And also just because they had a snow requirement on their terrain needs, so I just put it in. I think it looks pretty neat. A little bit about the animal. The American bison, or the buffalo, are absolutely the embodiment of a conservation success story. They were all but wiped out in the 19th century because of hunting, destruction of habitat, and diseases introduced from domestic cattle. To help you visualize how effective the efforts were to conserve these animals, by 1889, it was estimated that there were only 23 living individuals in Yellowstone and 800 in private herds. Now there are roughly 500,000. They're near threatened on the endangerment scale, which means they're really close to least concern, which is a baffling improvement. This was accomplished through super strict breeding programs starting in the 20th century by native people. Strict as in very selective breeding to get a really genetically diverse population, as well as to root out domesticated cattle genes, which had been introduced to the bison herds. From there, seeing how important the American bison is, U.S. Congress established federally protected herds in Yellowstone, Oklahoma, and Montana, attempting to follow in their footsteps to preserve the buffalo. And since then, it was just a matter of time and a lot of effort from the people working in the breeding programs. Now they don't actually live in Yosemite meadows, let alone in Yosemite at all. But this is a zoo. I don't really have to follow any strict rules like that. And I do think it would be a rather nice habitat for them, though. In-game, they're super happy with it. Probably happier than the grizzly bears and the flamingos. Even though there was much more coverage than they preferred, but that's just a given at this point. I like the idea of the buffalo being a part of some sort of selective conservation herd here in Little Eden. I'd like to go back in and put in some backstage-ish pens to isolate selective breeding pairs, that sort of thing. That's the kind of stuff that I get really nerdy about. So, next episode, you'll probably see a lot of that. I do want to go in and put in backstage for all the animals to really hone in on that zoo feeling rather than just national park, which is what I was talking about earlier. Enough about the buffalo, though. I want to talk a little bit about what I'm building here to keep in theme with being a real zoo. I wanted to make a little restaurant or some kind of place to get food. I end up making it a Street Fox Coffee just because I think the sign is cute and it seems cozy. But anyway, I wanted to stick to the stone and timber feel I've got going through the rest of the zoo, as well as shaking up a little bit. So I lean pretty heavy into the feel of a log cabin here, and then lean even farther into that feel with the next build to make it a little diverse rather than just the same building over and over. I do custom walls for this because there isn't really a good rustic wood wall, not like this wonderful dry stone wall that I love and use in every single building. I also do a little bit of an interior, mostly just a facade kind of thing, in that little connecting area with the glass you'll see. I also go through and do, I fill in the area with a lot more plants. I do a little bit of gardening, I guess would be the word for it. It's still pretty rough because I don't want to get too far into really strict, clean foliage. The most I do is the little trimmed cypress trees, just because I do want to keep Little Eden rather natural and rustic. I want to keep the vibe of a national park without the restrictions of one, if that makes sense. The only other thing I really want to talk about before we jump into the real time is my plans for the future of this park. I am a university student, so I won't be able to keep this pace up for long, but I will continue making videos. It's just fun, and I have an excuse to ramble on about ecosystems and animals. It's a win-win situation for me. Within Little Eden, however, plans are pretty straightforward. I do want to keep it a rather contained zoo, so the landscape I've built up is pretty much the perimeter. There's room for a few more animals, and I do have a plan for those, as well as more little plazas like the one I'm working on here in this video. It seems a little far-fetched with how new I am to the community, but I'd like to get one or two people to really help me polish and flesh out this park, because there are definitely things I could work on. If anything, I may just ask for critiques. In fact, yeah, if you guys have any suggestions for things you'd like to see, whether it be a building, change in layout, an animal, whatever, I want to know what you think I could improve on. In the end, I'm really just making Little Eden for myself, for fun, but getting feedback is always welcomed. I want to make this zoo, I want to make Little Eden as good as possible, really. I think that's all I really need to talk about. I'll show you what we're working on here with this log cabin in the real time. Let's just jump into that. I'll be right back with the real time. I'm back with the real-time portion. I just want to start with showing off the terrain work that I did for the mountains. They're not too detailed yet, so we're not going to go too much, spend too much time with them. Just to give you an idea of the shape, and show you where all the spaces left to fill in really are. Other than that, I want to point out that we've done a little infrastructure. I've put in a small parking lot. I didn't want to go too big with it because we are limited by space. I'm going to put a couple street tunnels in to give the semblance that there's probably more parking somewhere else. Other than that, I changed around the layout of the entrance building a little bit. I put up some conservation boards because before, when I first made this, the building didn't really seem like it had a purpose other than to be a staff building. But since it's so close to the entrance, I really wanted to make it feel like it was part of the visitor experience. So I made it the Little Eden's Visitor Center. It still looks a little uninviting, but we can work on that. I think the little billboards really helped with that. Right next to it, I've touched up this building a little bit. The trim used to be a really weird gray-black, but I've changed it to the natural brown just to fit in with the rest of the park a little better, as well as put in a little detailing. I like the idea of this building being kind of like a gift shop, something like that. Probably something that I'd put mementos into. This is the other building I was talking about, the little flamingo viewing area. It used to be a really weird rounded building with the Asian roofs, and it just didn't fit in with the rest of the building, so I changed it around, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. There's a little bit of an interior, nothing too spectacular, it's just something that looks good when I take screenshots for the most part. I like how it looks, especially this little rounded gable area. Other than that, I changed these pathways from concrete to gravel, just because looking at pictures of some of the more developed parts of Yosemite National Park, they don't really have concrete. A lot of it is easily removable gravel, and that made sense to me, so I wanted to include that here just to continue that feel. This is basically the extent of the non-natural planting I do, is these little dwarf cornels on the sides. Up here, this is what I was talking about with putting in more viewing platforms. Especially for the bears, this gives you a really nice view of most of the bear's habitat, actually. You can see all the way back to the far wall, as well as putting some more education boards. There was some down there by the flamingos, you can kind of see them. This is basically a copy of the building I did over here, but with a little bit different style. I may actually just move this one over there because I like how this one looks better, in all honesty, but I think that's just a matter of me building it later, so I understand the parts and the vibe a little bit better. The bear habitat actually was touched up a little bit too. I wanted to smooth out this river a little bit because in hindsight, it's a lot bigger than I really intended it to be. Unfortunately, I got that glitch where when you remove the water, you can't put it back in. So I just had to deal with what I got. So I put in some more rocks around in this area, as well as foliage to kind of push in the boundary of the river a little bit. As well as putting in this bridge for the bears. Because this is another thing I want to do, is not be afraid of putting in man-made structures. Because it is a zoo. I need to keep reminding myself that. I know I'm saying it a lot this episode. It's mostly for me, more than you guys. Beyond that, though, the bear habitat is mostly the same. Up here, however, I put in this little raised viewing platform. I want to put a cover over it. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. Gives you also a really nice view of the whole habitat. Up here is that little plaza that I was spent most of the time building this episode. Here's the little conservation welfare center that I was talking about. A lot more modern and clean. I think I mostly wanted to do that because it is such a modern building. It's an animal welfare center, and I wanted to have that contemporary architecture style to really get across that feeling. And I think it worked out well. I've got some seating areas under there, as well as the conservation boards on either side, just to kind of get that message across. There's staff entrances on the sides and back. That's clipping, and I'll move that later. I put in a lot more foliage just to fill out the sight lines. Over here is the Street Fox coffee that we built, or I built. You watched. Here you can see the interior that I did. It's really plain. I used the path trick to put in the tables and the benches. They can't actually get in there. I did remove the paths, but I think with the lighting in there, especially at night, it really draws the eye to that area. I can show you that actually. There you go. You can see inside a lot better at night, and it just kind of gives the facade that there is more than meets the eye. Beyond that, I did do, this is the semi-man-made planting that I was talking about. Mostly just this row of fairy fan flowers. I think that's what they're called. Fairy fan flowers, yes, along the edge. Here's the log cabin. It is the staff center for this area. There's no actual functional buildings within there, but I think it works pretty well, especially compared to some of the staff centers that you actually see at Yosemite National Park. A lot of them have this kind of repurposed log cabin vibe, and I think it looks pretty nice. I will put some plants in these terracotta pots. Beyond that, we have the little seating area. There's not much of a view, but if a bison does come up and stand right along this edge, I guess you can see them. But this one's mostly just to enjoy the scenery, and it fills in this empty space that I had back here pretty well. This is the little trimmed cypress that I was talking about as well. I also have them up here. Here's another little staff plaza I want to fill out. We'll work on that later, as well as cleaning up these bridges to make them look a lot more like bridges and not just like raised paths, because they do look pretty boring, but we'll figure that out later. I don't think I have much more to show you. Most of this we went over in the video, but I just wanted to show you all the little bits and bobs I did off camera, because it was scattered all over the zoo. I think it turned out pretty good. That's all I really have for you guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Next video will probably be another animal, but you're never certain. I'm never certain. I might do a bunch of stuff off camera again if I get the crashes. I guess we'll see. This is the send-off. I'm still trying to figure out how to do endings well. Bye, I guess.